Have you ever stopped to think about this? It's kind of a head scratcher. Pretty much every country on the planet is in debt. We're talking the US, China, Germany, Japan, you name it. They owe massive amounts of money. But hold on. If everybody owes money, who exactly is everyone supposed to pay it back to? The answer isn't some secret person or a single country. It's the system itself. So let's pull back the curtain and see how this whole thing actually works. And the scale of this is, well, it's just mind-boggling. Right now, total global debt is sitting at over $315 trillion. To give you some perspective, that's nearly 3 times the value of the entire global economy. It's a number so massive, it barely even feels real.
Which brings us right back to that central mystery. If the whole world is in the red, who's in the black? Who is the ultimate creditor? You see, debt isn't just a burden we carry. It's actually the invisible scaffolding holding up our entire modern world. And the truth is, way more circular than you might think. All right, to start cracking this case, let's look at the biggest borrower of them all, the United States. If we can figure out who the US owes money to, we can start to see the bigger global picture. Okay, so the US national debt is currently at an eye-watering $38 trillion. That's the highest it's ever been. A truly colossal figure. But the big question is, who's actually holding all the IOUs for that cash? And right here, we find our first major clue. A full 2/3. The vast majority of U.S. debt is actually held right at home. It's owed to American banks, to pension funds, insurance companies, and even to the Federal Reserve itself. So what about everyone else? Well, this is where a really common myth gets busted. We hear all the time that the US is in debt to China. But look at the numbers. China holds only about 2% of the total. The biggest foreign creditor? That's actually Japan. So here's the key takeaway. America's biggest creditor is, well, it's America. The US Treasury issues bonds, which American institutions buy. American taxpayers then fund the interest payments on those bonds, and that money flows right back into things like American retirement accounts. It's one giant circular system. And, this idea of a country borrowing from itself isn't some new thing. It was actually born out of war. Way back in 1694, England needed money to fight France, so it came up with a brilliant idea: the government bond. It was basically a promise to pay lenders back using future tax money. And just like that, debt went from being a sign of failure to a powerful tool for building a nation. Okay, now let's zoom out, because the circular logic we just saw in the US, it doesn't stop at the border. The entire planet is caught up in this massive interconnected web of debt. It's like a planetary game of hot potato, but with trillions of dollars. It kind of works like this. Japan lends money to the US by buying its bonds. Then, the US lends money to Europe through organizations like the IMF. Then, Europe lends to developing nations. And to complete the circle, those same developing nations often lend right back to the West by buying their government bonds. It's a chain where every single promise is just secured by another promise. I love this analogy from our source material. It just hits the nail on the head. The global financial system is like a giant poker game where everyone is playing with borrowed chips. The only thing keeping the game going is that everyone trusts the chips are worth something and nobody dares to cash out and walk away. So if everyone is both a debtor and a creditor, who's actually running this whole machine? Who are the operators behind the scenes, making sure this game never, ever stops? Well, it's basically a 3-step dance. First, you have governments, and they decide they need to borrow money. Second, you have the markets. We're talking huge pension funds and hedge funds, and they decide which countries are a safe bet. And third, you have the central banks, like the Federal Reserve. They're the ultimate backstop. If nobody else wants to buy a country's debt, they can literally create new money out of thin air to buy it themselves, just to keep the system flowing. And this gets to a really deep, profound truth about money itself. Because central banks create money by buying debt, there's really no such thing as debt-free money in our system. Every single dollar, whether it's in your pocket or in your bank account, basically has an invisible IOU attached to it. Which brings us to the biggest secret of this entire system. This is the part that finally solves our paradox. And it all comes down to a simple misunderstanding about what it means to repay a debt. Okay, here it is. The big aha moment. When you or I take out a loan, say for a car, our goal is to pay it all back, the original amount plus the interest, until the balance is zero. But governments, they don't play by those rules.
Their goal is only to pay the interest. As for the principal, that original chunk of money, they just roll it over. They issue new debt to pay off the old debt, and the plan is to do that forever.
That sounds absolutely crazy, right? It leads to the most logical question in the world. If a country has the money, why on earth wouldn't they just pay it all off and be done with it?
The answer is completely bonkers and totally counterintuitive. See, for the global markets, government debt isn't a bad thing. It's the ultimate safe asset. Pension funds, banks, even other countries, they all rely on things like U.S. Treasury bonds as the safest place to park their cash. So if the U.S. were to pay off all its debt, it would actually destroy the global financial system by removing its very foundation.
So instead of paying it down, governments do the exact opposite. They just keep issuing more debt rhythmically, over and over again. This constant cycle acts like a heartbeat for the global economy, pulsing through every pension fund, every mortgage, and every market on Earth, just keeping the whole thing alive. But this entire massive global machine runs on just one single, fragile ingredient: confidence. So what happens when that confidence starts to crack? What happens when the trust that holds it all together begins to break? Well, we've all seen the consequences, and they can be devastating. When the markets lost faith in Greece, the result was years of brutal austerity. When Sri Lanka couldn't make its payments, its entire economy collapsed. For countries like Argentina, this endless cycle of debt has become a national curse. When the trust breaks, the human cost is very, very real.
And there's another hidden effect of the system. Those interest payments, they don't just flow randomly through society. The money consistently flows upward, from the general population of taxpayers and workers to the institutions and the wealthy investors who actually own all those bonds. And this becomes a major driver of global inequality.
So in the end, we're left with a system where the lines between who owes and who owns have become completely blurred. Through our taxes that pay the interest, through our pensions that own the bonds, and our savings in the bank, we are all part of this engine. We're all debtors and creditors at the same time, all fueling a machine that has to keep borrowing to survive. And that leaves us with this one final provocative thought. The real secret of all this debt is that the plan was never to actually pay it back. The real plan is just to keep the world believing that one day it could be. It's a closed loop of trust. And the biggest question for all of us is, how long can that trust last?